Hey everyone, Ivy League Gaming here, and today we're playing Raid Shadow Legends, and we're going to talk about the new buff in the game, Taunt. Now, you may think, didn't I already watch this video? Or didn't you already talk about this once? Well, I have a little bit of clarifications to go over. I have some more information directly from Plarium that clarifies some things that I wasn't sure about. I also realized that some of the way I showed things in my previous video made it look like I was acting like Provoke was not there, but that wasn't the case. And there was a little bit of overall confusion and misunderstandings between both me and the viewers, and that's my fault as the content creator. So here I am, ready to make sure that I give you guys the best content I can and do a clarification of all the details I know about the Taunt buff. So before we get into talking about the new champions that have it, whether they're good or not for Hydra, and whether or not Taunt works at all in Hydra, does it work at all from any of the heads? Certain ones, yes, certain ones, no. Is it really worth it? Is it good? Is it bad? Let's discuss it all. So before we get to that, I'm going to take a pause here. I'm going to cut in my description of talking about the Taunt buff and reading the very detailed description that we got from Plarium about how the Taunt buff works. And then we're going to cut back in and we're going to talk some Hydra and more about this Taunt buff. Figured it would be best to literally put it on the screen, so if you guys want to take a screenshot so you can understand this and refer back to it later, that would really help. So let me read through for those of you that are mostly listening and less watching. Alright, the new buff is called Taunt, and there are 2 new champions from the new Sylvan Watchers faction that have skills with this buff. Green Warden, Ruark, and Dude in the Runic. Just a bit about how it works. If a champion is under a Taunt buff, enemies can only target that champion. If there are several champions under a Taunt buff on the same team, enemies can target any of the champions that have the taunting buff up. When using an AoE attack, only the champions under the Taunt buff can be targeted, but their allies will still take damage from the AoE as normal. So that's like those 2-part skills, you know, like a Trunda, where you can only attack one person, but then there's an AoE to follow. Alright, the Provoke debuff priority over Taunt buff, meaning, the Provoke debuff has priority over the Taunt buff, meaning that a provoked champion will still only target the champion who places Provoke debuff on the team rather than anyone under a Taunt buff. So Provoke over Taunt, simple enough. In addition, there's only one champion under a Taunt buff on a team, it will supersede any other buffs that affect targeting. Like Veil, Perfect Veil, meaning a champion under both Taunt and Veil buffs will be targeted. However, if there are multiple champions under Taunt buffs on a team, buffs that affect targeting, like Veil and Perfect Veil, will take effect to decide who will be targeted. For example, in a situation where 2 champions under Taunt buffs, one of them is also under a Veil, the champion only under Taunt will be targeted, whereas the champion under Taunt and Veil will not. It's so interesting. Okay, that makes sense. I mean, let's be fair. Veil, they're supposed to not be targeted. That's kind of the point. All right, the Taunt buff cannot be spread, and its duration cannot be increased. It can be stolen, removed, and its duration decreased. It's really important information there to know. But today, the reason I want to talk about this new buff is for the sake of Hydra. So I want to find out, how does this actually work in Hydra? So if we look here, it says that only a champion under, a Taunt buff will be targeted, right? So if there's a single target attack from a boss, does it still work? Or is there any exceptions with bosses? Let's find out. Alright, so when it comes to Hydra, we want to see the value of the Taunt buff. Is there any value? How does it work? Who can it protect, right? That's what we're saying. So When it comes to the Head of Decay, the Head of Decay has a conditional single target attack. It attacks the enemy with the lowest HP. So I did get clarification that this unfortunately means even if someone else has a taunting buff up and they're not provoked, either way, provoked or not provoked, doesn't matter, they will not target the person with taunt because this supersedes it. This is more important. So same thing when it comes to the Head of Mischief. The Head of Mischief always targets the head with the most buffs. So it doesn't matter if taunt is on that character or not. If they don't have the most buffs, Mischief is not going to target that champion. So number one rule out, sorry, it does not guarantee a Mischief target, which is probably what a lot of people are thinking. But more than likely, a couple of champions out so far, that is going to make them have the most amount of buffs to be a Mischief target. So in some cases, that might be the reality, but not always. So what we're going to do here is I want to show you guys the Head of Suffering. There it goes. Boom. And he did it. The Head of Suffering, A3. This attacks one enemy, places Pain Link. It did go ahead and attack the taunting champion. So this is a good thing. It does show that it works. Now, is this super valuable? Having someone to tank the Head of Suffering's A3. Probably not. Because depending on your situation, you're probably going to resist the Pain Link anyway. Or you're going to block it. Or you're going to be able to have someone to cleanse it. So usually this Pain Link debuff is not that big of a deal. But it is in this case working. This champion is a Mischief tank. Or is a tank for that skill, I guess. But he's also, like I said, he's serving multiple roles. So we'll talk about that after to see if that's still valuable, still worth it. But yeah, let's go try to get to the Head of Torment to see if we can test the Head of Torment as well. He has a single target A1 that has no other conditions. So the Head of Torment should also always use his A1 on whoever has the taunt buff. All right. I don't want to kill the Head of Torment. Okay. Okay. Don't kill the Head of Torment. I'm not going to use the A2 on purpose. Boom. And success. We have the taunt buff on our champion, and the Head of Torment did choose to target him. So there's the perfect examples. It does work in a couple situations, but are those situations worth bringing this buff into Hydra? Let's discuss. So we have our epic here, Duned in the Runic. He has this taunt with a strengthen and counterattack on his A3. This makes him the Mischief target. Simple enough. That's a really nice skill. Just being the Mischief target is great for Hydra, right? Well, kinda. You want more than that, don't you? So I think when it comes down to it, taunt is only good for Hydra. Here's my final verdict. Taunt is only good for Hydra if everything else about that champion with it is also good for Hydra, because it's not that impactful to just have the Head of Torment A1 and the Head of Suffering A3 be the distraction. And is it even gonna time correctly? That's a whole nother battle. Now that's one more thing to have to time perfectly. As you can tell, this champion in particular did not keep up the taunt 100% of the time. I did not put lasting gifts or anything like that on him yet, so that could help, but it's not a guarantee. So I think unless we have buff extension, which, hold the phone, that's the reality, right? Wrong. We cannot use buff extension on taunt, I believe, just like you can't use it debuff extension on provoke. So it seems like the taunt did not extend, so I don't think that's really going to be valuable either, because unless we can keep that up the whole time, is the value even there? If it's just like, ooh, the A1 from the Head of Torment, big deal. The A3 from Suffering with Pain Link, I think we can deal with that in other ways. I've never had an issue with the Pain Link debuff in all of my Hydra runs. It just doesn't really seem to play that much of a role with everyone else having other utility involved. And so he's a Mischief target. He places a shield and increases the duration of all buffs by 1 turn. And he has a chance to remove a debuff from all allies. So you could say he's okay for Hydra in general because of his cleanse on the A1, his protection on the A2, which is great when the Head of Wrath is around. He also extends buffs so he could keep these shields going, and the other buffs he could keep going as well from other champions. That could be valuable enough right there, right? I think so. And also he has an AoE, so if you put him with a War Master Mastery, that's going to be some damage. So this champion in particular, I would still say is pretty solid for Hydra, especially if the Head of Wrath is in the starting rotation and you want a little extra protection with a shield. So that's good. And the Head of Mischief, yeah, he's going to be a mischief target because he's putting 3 buffs on himself. And that taunt is only for 1 turn, but the other 2 are for 2 turns on a 3-turn cooldown. So between that and some shields, he seemed like he was the mischief target most times. Should be the case. You can always put lasting gifts on him to help make sure that happens. And then we have another champion here that we need to discuss when we're talking about taunt. So what about Green Warden? Is he good for Hydra? Now, this one's debatable for me as well. I think they're both okay, but they're not amazing for Hydra, I would say. He's got taunt, strengthen, and increased defense that he puts on himself. That's great. That's overall survivability, but just for himself. And makes him, again, a mischief target pretty easily. We got 2-turn taunt, so it's better here. 2-turn taunt on a 4-turn cooldown with strengthen and increased defense. Plus, if you threw a shield buff or a blood shield accessory on him, if we ever get them for this faction, that could help him stay the mischief target. But there's something about his kit that I really don't like for being a mischief target, and that's that he kind of places a shield on whichever ally, when an ally loses 10% or more of their HP from a single hit, blah, blah, blah. I don't like random shields being thrown around when you're dealing with mischief targeting because it's just one more thing that can throw it off. So that's not great. So is he a good mischief target? Maybe not. I would say no. He does have an AoE decrease attack, which is a hit, so War Master Mastery is nice and all. And he can steal continuous heal buffs, but that's not really that important unless you have Duchess or someone in your team and the heads are stealing them from your team, which you don't want it to be that messy in the first place. That's the whole point of a mischief target. So I think overall, this just doesn't feel that exciting for Hydra. So I would say even more so no on the legendary versus the epic. The epic's actually better for Hydra, I think, than this legendary. And overall, the taunt buff itself, it's not worth it for Hydra. It's not worth trying to get that into the equation. Now again, if this buff on the other champion, sure, it helps make him a mischief target. The rest of his kit's okay. Maybe you use him in Hydra for some protection here, buff extension, etc. Great. But don't go out of your way to make taunt be part of the equation because you know it doesn't matter with DK. It does not make you a mischief target guaranteed with just the taunt buff alone. So keep that in mind for future champions that come out with the buff as well. And yeah, I think unfortunately so far for our testings, taunt overall has been a bit of an underwhelming debuff. Hydra, no Hydra. It's hard time trying to find the right place for it. Maybe some niche arena uses, but overall, not the greatest addition to the game this patch. Oh wait, with minor exception. So it does seem to force the clan boss's stun hit. So with stun targeting, you might be able to make taunt work in your favor, but that's another discussion. This was Hydra talk. So meh on the Hydra for taunt. Anyway, hope you guys appreciate this video, and I hope you understand the remake of this video for sake of clarification and also just better testing and correcting a mistake that I made personally. Gotta do that sometimes as a content creator. We're not perfect, but alright guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.